The Pokewalker is perhaps the greatest accessory Pokemon has ever made. On a very surface level, it can be considered just a simple pedometer accompanying Heartgold and Soulsilver. You deposit a Pokemon into it from the games, and then you get to take them along with you as you go about your day. But if you look just a bit deeper, you'll find entire, expansive worlds hiding inside this unsuspecting device. When you send in a Pokemon to go on a walk with, you'll be able to play minigames with the purpose of collecting extra Pokemon and items to bring back with you to the games. There's a Pokeradar encounter minigame and a dowsing machine minigame, and what you can find with these on any walk is determined by the route you send your Pokemon to. This being where the worlds of depth begin to unfold. There's a wide array of locations for you to adventure at, each with their own list of encounters and items for you to work on. And when paired with the subtle world building and attention to detail, these extraneous locations within the Pokemon universe offer their own depth to explore and imagine, described to be existing as new locales in the familiar regions of other mainline games. A pleasant walk through a field in Hoenn, a trip through a stormy coast in Sinnoh, or a hike up a mountainous pass in Johto. These are truly hidden worlds lurking within these incredible games. But some of these worlds are lost. No longer accessible by legitimate means and are completely locked away from any regular playthrough. There are a total of 27 routes that you can adventure on with the Pokewalker. 8 of these routes take place in Johto and can be unlocked from the start of a Heartgold or Soulsilver playthrough. And then you can get another 12 that are split between Hoenn and Sinnoh once you beat the Elite Four and get the National Dex. These 20 routes are timeless and can be relatively easily enjoyed to this very day, assuming you can reach the step requirements to unlock them. But this leaves our 7 lost worlds, all routes unlocked through special event criteria, the large majority of which were linked to timed, real-world events that have long reached their end date. The least lost of these 7, and one that is technically still obtainable, is Night Sky's Edge, a route commemorating and themed around Jirachi. This is a really unique entry, because the only unlock criteria here is having a Jirachi of any kind on your save. The route doesn't drop off of an event, and just any old Jirachi will get the doors open for this location. But it is famously a mythical Pokemon, which are usually locked to time distribution, so it is still plenty rare. But we're in luck on this front, because Jirachi has an untimed distribution on the Colosseum bonus disc on the GameCube. So we can just get one there, send it over to Gen 3, and then transfer it up. Now I don't actually have this game, so let me just head over to eBay and grab a... Actually, you know what? I can live without it. The actual route here is loaded with style and charm, and it features Pokemon and items thematic of a wishing cave you could properly imagine as Jirachi's home. And even though Jirachi doesn't actually appear on the route, this is the closest thing we've gotten in the mainline games to an official dungeon or location for the Pokemon. Jirachi has virtually no physical presence in the worlds and lore of the mainline games, and that imagery of the Wishing Cave comes primarily from spin-off titles. So I find it very reassuring to have this identity reinforced in the mainline canon in any way, even if it's really just the smallest thing. In terms of mechanical substance, the offerings here may not seem very impressive. Some low-level generic cave Pokemon and a few treasures to sell probably don't have your attention at the late game point you can actually transfer up a Jirachi from Ruby and Sapphire. But in the context of the original intended release, I consider this a very impressive route. In the summer of 2010, there was a Wi-Fi distribution for Jirachi, and the only prerequisite for receiving it in the game was getting the Pokédex. So you could theoretically start the story with it on your team if you wanted to. But for that to be the case and the route to line up with any distributions, it would sort of need to be designed with the lowest common denominator in mind. And from that perspective, I think it's really cool that getting the route like this would open you up to starting the game with a Jigglypuff or Clefairy too, Pokemon that are otherwise quite a ways into a playthrough. And this Clefairy uniquely has Moonlight, a pretty incredible move, at level 8 despite learning it at 37. Nothing outrageous, but definitely a cool little extra tidbit with the theming of the route. Not to mention, the big prizes for this route are TMs for Psychic and Moonstones, items that can make the trip worth it for any trainer. Just watch out for that 10,000 steps requirement for Psychic on any given day. If you've got the means to grab a Jirachi, I'd say this is a route definitely worth walking on. But otherwise, you're looking at an odd timeliness to this obscure Pokemon location. Another odd entry comes in Beyond the Sea, a route taking place on the beach off of a distant island. Judging from the Pokemon pool, it seems to be somewhere off the coast of Johto, but it's called Beyond the Sea after all, so I'd say it can be just as easily placed wherever your imagination is willing to take you. Unlike Night Sky's Edge, this stage is truly lost, but not as a result of a time distribution ending. In fact, this was arguably one of the easiest routes to unlock on the device, no walking required. All you had to do was trade for a foreign Pokemon over the GTS. But it's also something that has reached the unfortunate difficulty of impossible with the closing of online services for DS games. And to this end, I don't think Beyond the Sea was ever supposed to really be that special. It was lost merely to circumstance because of its unique logistic positioning. There is still definitely a certain novelty to it though as a special unlockable. Almost all of the items are rare berries that further tap into the idea of a tropical island setting. And while the Pokemon itself isn't too notable, every Staryu caught here will come holding a water stone. And I don't know what it is about this specific run of games, but they made evolution stones a nightmare to get a hold of in Johto, so this Staryu would actually be a bit of a godsend. This Octillery is kind of cool too. It's here at a lower level than it normally evolves at, and it's holding a focus band of all things. I don't know why it's holding a focus band, but the only other way to get this mediocre item is for a whopping 48 VP at the Battle Frontier. So I suppose there was something of a niche for this Pokemon. One of the coolest things about this route for me is that because it had such a generic and accidental method of unlocking, it's probably the likeliest off of the whole list for you to find randomly on a save from the time period. It could be a little bonus surprise when you check out the profile on a secondhand cartridge. You know, like those videos where they explore the old save files? Pretty cool Giratina there, pal. But make sure you check out the Pokewalker routes too. And just like the timed event Pokemon we all know and love, there were timed event Pokewalker routes too. The other 5 locations, and their treasures found inside, were fully intended to be lost to time as soon as their distributions ended, making these locations of Yellow Forest, Sightseeing, Rally, Winter's Path, and Amity Meadow some of the most obscure locales in the entire mainline series. But some worlds are more lost than others, so let's start with the most general of these and work our way up to the lostest losts. Only 2 of these events saw international releases. Yellow Forest and then Winter's Path were both distributed over about a month's time for Japanese, Korean, American, and PAL versions of the game, with both internet and local wireless distributions depending on the region. And so in the relevant time frame of 2009 and 2010, they were actually relatively well spread amongst players. Definitely long gone now, but I remember both of these very fondly, and they were pretty well loved among my friend group at the time. These 2 are also notably the only Pokewalker stages with official key art, so we can get a rare glimpse of how these 2 places would look in the official art style. Kinda weird to only do it twice and on little extras like these, but it's still extremely cool to get anything like this when it comes to an accessory. Players would first gain access to Yellow Forest, a forest filled entirely with strange and unusual Pikachu. All 6 Pokemon on the encounter table here are Pikachu, each with their own unique movesets and held items, and 4 out of the 6 come with moves not normally learned by the species, with the most notable of these being the rare surfing and flying Pikachu. This setup gives the stage a ton of novelty, but also the cool side effect of making the player have to come at the route with a completely different strategy from all the others. Because when you do an encounter on the Pokewalker, you only get 2 pieces of information. 1 in the species of the encounter, and then 2 in the number of grass patches that it took to find it. When you're using the Pokeradar, you click on the grass with an exclamation point coming out of it. If you do so successfully, either an encounter will begin or the process will continue, sort of like a chain with the real Pokeradar. If you make the full chain, you'll see a single, another single, a double, and then finally a triple before starting the encounter. This number loosely indicates what Pokemon you're going to find, as even though the routes have 6 possible Pokemon, any individual trip will pick 1 Pokemon out of each of the 3 tiers of rarity. And this makes for an unusual quest in Yellow Forest because all 6 Pokemon are Pikachu. There's no visual distinction between these 6. Normally you would just know that you hit the A tier, because it's Magby instead of Ponyta, for instance. But if you want those A tiers here, because Surf and Flying Pikachu are definitely worth chasing after, you have to pay attention to the grass more than the actual Pokemon. And that still isn't exactly surefire, because the 2nd and 3rd patches correspond to multiple tiers. This is really quite the minor thing in the grand scheme, but I've always thought this was such a cool design for a route because it was able to play with your expectations like this. And then it's attached to the novelty of all these fun and obscure Pikachus running around on it. So I'd say it pairs well with the other widespread event route, Winter's Path. This one is just as much of a party as Yellow Forest, but it went with a competitive battle factor instead of the former's mascot status. These are strong Pokemon with unique moves designed with battles in mind, and the item pool is full of top-tier treasures fit for use in PvP or at the battle frontier. It was one of the very rare spots for finding the choice items out in the wild without having to buy them at a battle facility. It had a number of Pokemon that were already rare or powerful as is, but with the additional benefit of moves they didn't usually learn. Not to mention a majority of them were not native to Johto. So if you got the event on a fresh save, you could really spice up a playthrough by having something like Beldum or Munchlax on your starting team. I remember being amazed at this event when I got it during the original run. It just felt so generous and powerful as both a distribution and a Pokewalker route. Outside of the very standard berries on the bottom of the item table, every offering here is exciting, unique, and special. The Munchlax here in particular was a true one-of-a-kind for this generation. The only way to get one with self-destruct was on this route. All of this together makes the place feel so curated. Instead of getting one handcrafted event Pokemon, it's like you get a whole 6 along a hand-picked list of possible items. This feeling is what makes these locations so fascinating and special to me as pieces of the series' history. Because unlike any specific event Pokemon given out during a time distribution, these routes are effectively event Pokemon spawners, and instead become this whole experience. Something that you can hold on to and live inside over and over again. But at the same time, this made their preservation much more volatile too. Unlike an event Pokemon you can trade or transfer around, these routes are attached to the save itself, so you can't start a new one without losing that access. But at least with those stages, the distributions were widely accessible and the memories were made, something that cannot be easily said for these last 3 routes. Finally, at the peak of Lost Worlds, the 3 stages Sightseeing, Rally, and Amity Meadow may be some of the most obscure locations in the entire Pokemon series. All 3 of these routes were distributed over local wireless at specific places in Japan, with one additional distribution for Sightseeing in Korea, and never seeing a release in any other region. It's almost ironic in a way, as while all 3 of these locations are so cute and commemorative, these ultra-limited release structures give them this air of mystery for me. Sort of like the original Azure Flute, Pokemon events like this that were never available in some capacity feel almost mystical to me. The routes themselves were clearly curated to a certain extent as well, so it's really strange these ones never saw the wider release. Like, Sightseeing kind of feels like the perfect Pokewalker route. It's nothing too serious, you're just seeing the sights in the city. There's some weird and rare Pokemon, and all the items are themed around snacks and treats. And then it's got this one-of-a-kind factor for having Wild Torchic. It's the first instance of a wild starter in the entire series. Novelty, charm, and notoriety. The complete package. And then Rally is unusual for being a pretty clear-cut reference to the Diamond and Pearl anime, with Pikachu, Croagunk, Baniri, and Pachirisu all representing that series' protagonists. I don't understand Sableye and Chatot as the other 2 though. It doesn't necessarily have to be an anime reference, but these 2 being here really confuses me, so I would love to know why they got drafted into this group. Then you've got a very purposeful route with Amity Meadow, with the whole thing dedicated to baby Pokemon and getting their evolutions. I think I get why this one was cut the most. While it is sort of a toolbox for this group of Pokemon, there are a lot of repeat entries from other routes and locations, although it probably would have been pretty valuable just for the evolution items alone. But overall, I couldn't tell you why these 3 specific routes were kept so closely guarded. They're all simple fun with pretty straightforward goals as locations, so it would have just been more content and depth for some already incredible games. But their strange exclusion does elevate them to the height of today's criteria, which is why I would call them the most lost of all our lost worlds, rounding out our list for these elusive locations. And that would normally be it, but I would be remiss to not break character here for a second and talk about the DNS trick before we close out. Because while our lost worlds have long lost their official means of access, there are fan servers that have been set up for downloading old events like this. No cheating or save injecting required. The process is a bit technical, so I've linked some resources in the description, but the main things you'll need are a DS, your cartridge, and admin controls for either a router or mobile hotspot. So if you want to try and explore some of these locations for yourself, you have the means necessary thanks to the hard work of some community members. And that's all I've got for you, for real this time. Hopefully you enjoyed this walk down a weird, dreamlike memory lane. I already think dated event Pokemon are some of the most interesting pieces of history in this series, but to have timed locations and ultimately experiences like that takes it to a whole new level. What sort of memories do you have with the Pokewalker, or just Heartgold and Soulsilver in general? Did you ever get to walk at any of these strange places? I'd love to hear about it. But alright y'all, it's been fun. I'll see you next time. Droomish out.